Hello, and welcome to Audiomind. This is a podcast where we talk about musical things, hopefully fun, interesting, unique musical things. And today we have an interview with a former classmate. If you would like to introduce yourself.
So, hey everyone, my name is Ola. I'm from Poland, and I met Andrew and Abby in Amsterdam during our studies. We did together some courses on cognitive musicology, and since we all liked it a lot, we discussed about it lots of times. And I'm going to tell you today about the thesis I did in Amsterdam, and hopefully you will enjoy it.
I mean, I enjoy it, so I think everyone should enjoy it. I don't see why not.
Yeah.
But I will also say that actually on your thesis, I can't speak for Abigail because I don't know, but I will say just for transparency's sake, like I actually was part of the experimentation group on your thesis.
Oh, I was too. Yeah, I forgot. I did this.
Yeah, so I think we should just throw that out there. I mean, obviously when you're doing like anything musical related and you have to do experimentation in this style, I mean, both of you I think had some audience not audience participation, but like general population participation. You're gonna ask your friends because you're just like, I'm desperate for anyone. So
of course,
it's a struggle.
Of course, yes. Yeah. I was trying to engage as many people as possible, so thank you so much that you did it. Because of course, you know, I guess it is some kind of sacrifice to listen to flute tones.
I liked it. Now that I remember that I did it.
20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's like 20 to 30 minutes.
It was a while.
Which is long.
Which are...
Yeah,
it was pretty long. And, you know, I guess since it was not empty in any kind of context of nice melodies or any kind of musical piece, it were like literally one flat tones. I guess it is challenging. I have to say it is challenging, even for flutists. So I was trying to engage, let's say, flutists as a professional group, musicians that are non-flutists, but they still had some kind of musical training, and non-musicians at all, just to be able to compare their reactions and, let's say, the word choice they did. And each of the groups told me it was challenging. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, let's start off. Would you mind introducing your project and kind of like giving a summary of what you were trying to do with your research? Yeah,
so basically what I was trying to do with this research was to see what kind of acoustic and temporal features of flute sound do make a difference in the quality perception of listeners. So by manipulating which of the acoustic and temporal features of flute sound do we actually influence the timbre and the perception of the flute sound by all the listeners. I was also looking at the correlation of the words and the flute sound, and I was looking whether there was some kind of systematic relation between the word, so for example bright, and the audio, so whether lots of people was using the same word for the sound that had let's say some how to say it then, a cluster of some particular acoustic features, or whether we are just calling flute timbre by random, and basically when somebody tells me please play darker, it doesn't mean anything. So that was basically the my question, because many professional flute players pay a very high attention to the quality we produce. So me as a flute player, I spent hours and hours on playing flutes at home and trying to improve my flute sound. And of course during classes I took with different professors, we are also discussing a lot about the flute tone quality, but I was always wondering, when my teacher says you should try to create warmer, softer, nicer sound, does he mean the same what I mean? I mean, like, what is his mental representation of that words if we try to put it to the flute sound? And I was wondering whether can we actually assign any kind of words to the particular combinations of some acoustic features of the sound. So that was basically what I was trying to look for. And also, as I'm a flutist and I'm engaged with these sounds, particular sounds, in a much bigger extent than, let's say, guitar bass players or non-musicians at all, whether they actually can hear the difference. Because maybe we do this art just for us. But of course, if you have a concert for a public, there might be one or two professional flutists sitting and listening to you, but all the rest of people that are there do not necessarily specialize in a flute sound.
Right.
So that was very important for me to understand to how far can you hear the difference, and whether we can find some kind of systematic order in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because also as a musician myself, and also like singing vocalist, I guess, kind of, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting the words that people associate with how something sounds, and it's really, you know, in one way it is art, so it's subjective, these sorts of descriptive factors. So I think it's super interesting that there might be some sort of, you know, like actual physical acoustic feature that we can tie to like the words like bright or I don't know, flat, or, you know.
Yeah. Especially that as my impression was during all my music studies is that musicians use a lot of metaphors and rhetoric devices of language, like metonymies and metaphors, in order to communicate about the musical concepts between themselves. Of course, we first and foremost use music, but sometimes in order to get, let's say, into the same kind of idea, we do use words, and usually they are very literary, as we would be writing a beautiful poems. But then the question was, does it really mean anything, or we are just using those metaphors, and one by one we just hope that maybe you will get the same idea that I'm having while saying, I don't know, play as if elephant is stepping on your feet.
It's we use this
which actually you know, you would laugh, but this actually kind of comments do happen during orchestra rehearsals. And then, you know, you've got 50 people sitting behind the stands, and you have to get them all thinking as the elephant would be stepping on their feet. But what does it mean for you? Is it painful? It's difficult. So basically, I did my bachelor and master thesis in Belgium, also on the relation of language with rehearsals, with music rehearsals, just to see whether the metaphors we use bring anything to our playing or not. And it turned out that actually very often they help to create a unity in the group. But sometimes they might also create lots of misconceptions, especially if we are trying to explain something that can be explained by even medical terms. So it's one thing to speak about something abstract and using metaphors or rhetorical language as a filling gap, concepts. However, if we do already have some concepts that are created, as for example, flutists use a lot their body in order to produce the sound. So, for example, we have rib cage, we have diaphragm. So why do not use these words instead of imagine you are a balloon, or imagine that you are playing vibrato from your diaphragm, which of course doesn't exist because you can't. I mean, you are making vibrato from your vocal chords, but this kind of misconceptions may actually harm the production of the sound by some flutists, because then they will be trying as much as they can to produce vibrato with their belly or their stomach, and by that they will be squeezing and and making it impossible for the air to go through. So I think it's also very important to realize that playing, especially, and performing music, I mean, like, as for the performance, this is not only a beautiful aesthetic, beautiful aesthetic. The music is not only something beautiful and aesthetic and abstract object, but it is actually a practical and very physical job. So,
right. No, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting, and also a really good thing to think about as well when you're creating something, because you want it to be beautiful and aesthetic, and you don't always connect the physical properties of your creation of it to you don't always connect the physical to, like, the auditory, I guess.
It seems to me that sometimes what you wind up with is, particularly when you use metaphor, is like we're trying to explain a particular feeling, and what we wind up is disassociating the aesthetic quality we're looking for with the actual physical property of where it comes from. And just as Ola said, that can be kind of detrimental. You know, I'm looking for a brighter quality, and imagining a star in the sky is not going to necessarily help you get what you're looking for in terms of a brighter quality. Yeah. So, like, learning the physiology, I think there's also a gap between, sometimes we don't always understand when we play how we're achieving a particular sound until we very closely examine how we're playing. Down to nuance.
So that's exact. Yeah, exactly. So this is what I was kind of feeling is a bit lacking in a flute literature, that we still are not necessarily sure whether the words we are using in order to communicate about the timbre. And the timbre is a very difficult and abstract conception. It's not as easy to measure as articulation, for example.
Right.
So we do need to use words in order to communicate about the concepts. But since now the cognitive musicology as well as computational musicology give you actually the possibilities to measure it. I mean, to measure the timbre, to see whether the acoustic properties of the sound feature do really change when we and we name the changes in the timbre by particular specific words. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in the idea of how you deal with overtones, like the words that we use to deal with, like, I want more, higher overtones, or I want more lower overtones, and like whether those words actually mean anything when we say darker or lighter around those parameters.
Yeah. So from my studies that I did, interesting was that actually there are lots of matches between the words, the descriptions that professional flutists use, and actually the particular features or the clusters of different flute features. And the funny thing was that also very unexperienced let's say audiences or participants of my experiments did actually similar matches. So they basically used also the same, intuitively they used the same words in order to describe the sounds. So that's actually nice that we do have some kind of cross mapping, I mean like domain mapping in our heads if it's about the timbre and about the sounds. Of course, that would be still interesting to see or to compare these results with Japanese or maybe Chinese participants, where their flute sound conception might be different than ours,
right?
And to see whether they would be assigning the same words to the same features, or they would be taking it other hands. Of course, my study was not looking at whether people like this kind of flute sounds or not, was only to see whether they can hear the differences. But the funny thing is there is one more study made on flute timbre and the word description that also made with professional flutists and non-musicians, and they were using the same words to describe the same sounds, but their the sound preferences were completely different. So basically what the professional flutists were calling a good and nice sound was not so much preferable by non-musicians.
Really?
They would actually
no.
prefer the sounds that let's say by flutists have poor quality. so that's also very interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's like a symptom of like not being exposed to like proper flute sounds, and then if they hear something that's maybe something that a professional flutist wouldn't call good, but the non-professional or amateur thinks it's fine because they're used to hearing it that way, but the professional flutist isn't.
I guess, it depends with what are you associating the flute sounds. So usually the flute sounds, you don't hear it solo, right? You hear it in the orchestra.
Right.
Usually it has a beautiful, very soft, nice solos. It's never gonna sound hard or full next to the trumpets. However, when it's played solo or only with piano, you actually can have a very sound and rich sound. However, it's uncovered now by the orchestra, and then it does change. The context does change a little bit our conception of the sound. So then I can imagine that the non-musicians are not used to hear this kind of qualities of the sound. And they do not enjoy it as much. So so basically my study was, we could say, threefold. What I first did, I recorded 5 flutists. I collected their samples. I've got 460 separate flute notes, which I thought was really a lot. However, of course there were some kind of constraints. I could not use all of the samples because some I just had to reject because they were too short or the intonation was, let's say, too bad. It was not steady. So I ended up with 417 samples, and I thought, wow, it's still a lot.
Yeah.
So I definitely can do a lot with this material. And then I did a computational analysis on it. The let's say the exploratory analysis helped me to group the sounds by grouping them by the features that they had more silent or less silent, and by this I came to 4 factors, which I called dispersion. That was describing the degree of dispersion of the flute sound. So let's say we would use the words for it as it would be an open sound or very much focused sound. There was, of course, vibrato. So that refers to the fluctuation in the speed of the vibrato. So whether the sound was wobbly, as some people would say, when it had too much of the vibrato, or it was flat, there was none. Unsteadiness, and that was referring to the increasing changes in the MFCC spectra. And that's interesting because even though it was crucial factor for the factor analysis for the computer to determine and to group the sounds, the people do not perceive that. I mean, the people did not react to this factor in particular. There was this is the only factor that really yielded insignificant results. Maybe we just don't have words to describe it, or maybe it's indeed we do not really hear it. And then there was the darkness factor that was defining the distribution of the energy across the lower and upper frequencies. So this is when we call the sound that it's dark or when it's bright. So if we say it's bright, it's lacking lots of low frequencies, and if we say that it's dark and sometimes rich and full, it means that let's say that the flute player is trying to blow as low as possible in order to get this low frequency sound. Then afterwards, I've gotten, let's say, the 4 factors that might be meaningful to understand the different colors or different colors in the palette of the flute sound, because it's still, we speak about one instrument. There's no other instruments coming into play. And I had to see whether, the people can hear them, and they can, and whether they group the flute tones in the same way as the computer does. So I asked 3 professional flutists to first make a list, because I thought that even though it does bring some biases, because you already get a list with some words, so it's a challenge to do it without words. So you are getting you get primed, because you get a list with the words from which you can pick up and choose. But I thought, if I won't give this list, then non-musicians will maybe not take part of my in my experiment, because they might not feel of being able to describe 2 flute sounds. I mean, like, for them it might be exactly the same sounds, and they would not understand what I mean by describing the flute sounds. So that's why I provided them with the list, so at least they could be picking up some adjectives while listening to 2 different sounds and compare them that way. And then I created an online survey, indeed, and where I was looking at whether people can hear it or not. And from there, it came up that with the dispersion factor, when the degree of dispersion was very high, they were saying that it was airy, open. When it was slow, it was centered, nasal, and focused. When there was a vibrato, they were calling it with vibrato or with intense vibrato, whereas when there was no vibrato, of course, they call it without vibrato. So there was a thinking. And then also, of course, with the darkness, there was like with the predominance of lower overtones and with the predominance of the higher or lower overtones, or dark and bright, there were coming the differences. So it was nice that there were lots of this kind of these differences were confirmed by different groups on which I was doing the experiments.
So it was very successful.
So yeah, actually it was successful. Surprise.
It's exciting.
That must have been gratifying to have your research come back and be like, oh yeah, all these thoughts that I had were, I mean, getting a null hypothesis back is always like, oh, this leads to more research, but it's also nice to be like, everything I thought was right. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, well, everything. I'm not sure, I mean, I guess I was sure that non-musicians might not get really. I was hoping, but I was wondering whether will they get the same results as flutists, but actually they do so that's very interesting. But the question is now, is it because of our culture? Is it because we are familiar to this kind of conceptions of sounds, or does it really can be generalized to other music cultures as well, right?
Well, I mean,
so that was my question.
We have speaking of questions, Abigail and I have prepared some questions for you, and we I don't know how relevant they actually will be, because I'm not a science cognitive musicologist, but Abigail is, so hopefully her questions will be better than mine. But
yeah, mine were pretty basic. They were more like general questions about the study and like what it was and stuff, because you went real specific on your questions.
Yeah, well, I just
not real specific.
I just wrote questions about things that I wanted to know about. So we'll take turns asking a question each, and then you can answer them, or you can be like, "That's a dumb question. I don't want to answer that." That's also okay.
Andrew, why don't you start then?
Cool. So we were just talking a lot about like how overtone, I mean, specifically for me, when I was reading, I was very interested in the timbral quality in terms of darkness and brightness, in how those words were applied and actually used with some degree of accuracy. And I wondered, I am sort of changing the first question that I sent, but I'm wondering if the ability to control overtones so uniquely is a unique feature of the flute because of the way that the sound is created by blowing over a mouthpiece as opposed to playing like a reed instrument. Like we know it's an aerophone and it shares features of being an aerophone with other instruments. But I wonder if does the ability to control overtones so accurately, is that a feature of the flute because, and the use of the body as well, physiologically, is that a feature of the flute, or is that mostly, could that be applied to all woodwinds?
First, if it's about the body, it can be applied to all instruments, I would say, because let's say the woodwinds would have a special, not only woodwinds, but also the winds in general, they have special that we do create the speed of the air inside our body, right? It comes from our body. But the same as a pianist, for example, they really need to take care of the movement of their hands and even like of the position, how they sit. Mm-hmm. It all does influence a lot the quality of your sounds and the way how you will be playing. So I would say if it's about the body, it's really any kind of instruments. The singer is the same. The way how you will be sitting, the posture, it might help you or might disturb quite a lot your sound production. So I would say the body is definitely for all of the instruments. The thing is, for example, that with the winds, but this is of course my subjective opinion, is that maybe if I play piccolo and then all of a sudden I will start to blow less, you will hear it immediately in my sound. If I change a little bit, a small parameter, like for example, I will close my jaw or I will open my jaw, you will hear it immediately in the sound because it is, let's say, directly influencing the pressure that comes to the tube,
right?
Of the pressure in the air that comes to the tube. So that's a challenge for flutists, but also for the woodwind. So we have to be really steady and stable in keeping up the same, let's say, to dispose. I don't know whether the word dispose is correct here, but to blow all the time in the same way in order to keep the sound steady. That's why we are practicing long notes, for example.
Right.
Because it's not so, let's say, it's not so easy. I think also that in general that the other instruments can also control pretty well harmonics. Like for example clarinets, to my opinion, like I can hear it, I can hear difference in the sounds, but maybe it's also because I'm a flutist, so I'm a bit more sensitive on it. Maybe it's kind of easier to do it on flute, or less challenging if we speak it that way. Because as you say, we do not have any kind of... The thing is, it is more challenging and less challenging. I would say that the fact that you have the mouthpiece in your mouth, it does help you to create more stable connection with your body, but it's of course my it's my subjective idea. Whereas with the flute, we do not have any kind of mouthpiece that we can keep inside our mouth. It stays on our chin always. So what we basically have to do, we always have to direct the stream from our lips into the hole, and that's what makes it special in comparison with other instruments. So then that means that we should be choosing consciously the angle with which we are going to blow into the tube, and we should be also consciously being able to change the sizes of the hole in order to have a different kind of sounds. And of course the production of the speed in the air, that should be always very stable. Also that can also let's say be specifically applied to change the feature, acoustic feature of the flute sound. So I'm a bit afraid of saying here.
I think you're answering a lot of questions without like definitive answers, which is perfectly fine. I was just curious, like, what your opinion
I mean, I would rather not, because, you know, later I guess some clarinet players or some oboe or bassoon players will come and say that's not true. I find it, which of course can be, because I would say it's really subjective experience for everybody.
That's an answer in itself. So yeah, good.
Yeah. Definitely. I also think that you bring up a good point of like the way that the mouthpieces make the sound production so different from one instrument to another, because like even with reed instruments, I used to play clarinet when I was a small child, and I remember being taught by my teacher of like how I needed to position the mouthpiece and make sure that my lips were like exerting a certain amount of pressure. And I remember like after learning it, one of my friends played the saxophone, and we wanted to switch instruments to see like how it was to play the other's instrument. And I couldn't even make a sound out of a saxophone, which was strange, just because I wasn't even used to the way that I was supposed to be articulating the notes. And saxophone is supposed to be a lot easier to play because it's like a looser feel, but I couldn't do it. It's very interesting the way that you produce sound with a wind instrument, because it is very controlled by all the muscles in your mouth, and switching from one instrument to another is a big change. So yeah, it's interesting.
I remember I tried once bassoon. That was a disaster. I have to say, I kept the sound maybe for 2 seconds, and then it was dropping. It was like the intonation issues was a disaster. I couldn't understand how are they even able to play, you know, the solo right of the spring.
Yeah. I should ask.
Like keeping up so many bars. Yeah. I was like, seriously.
Yeah, it's wild. So one of my questions I was wondering was, what sort of challenges did you face when you were designing your experiment? I know that you did kind of touch on it, like the whole idea of relating a specific word with a specific sound, but what were the challenges in the design, but also did any particular challenges arise when you were in the process of doing your experiment?
Yeah, definitely the fact that I get a new domain, which was very new for me, that is computational musicology. Mm-hmm. And I read a lot about it. I read lots of articles. I also had a very good tutor, which was Ashley. He really helped me out a lot with it. But there is still surprising things coming up. So, for example, of course, the choice of what kind of analysis are we going to do. You just had to read a lot about this and try some of them to see what works and what does not. But actually, I was really surprised about my sample, because I was sure, wow, 460 notes, it's a lot. I'm definitely gonna be good with that. Then 400, it went lower to 417. I thought it's still a lot, it's not going to be a problem. But of course, Ashley said, take care, you know, because to run any kind of computational analysis, you really need a lot of data to let's say to teach it how it should be grouping the sound. So basically, what I got out at the end made me realize that I really have a problem with choosing the best samples for my online survey, because even though I've got those groups of very nice factors, it's still, I was using natural flute sounds. I decided not to take any kind of ecological validity, so I also kept the phase decays and everything, because I thought this is what I want to look at. I want to look at the real flute sounds, and I was not manipulating the flute sounds with, let's say, taking out some acoustic features in order to put more silent the other ones. I just decided to have them as they were. But it does make it challenging to have the criterion that would be that, for example, you have a note F, or fa. That would be fa for you, I guess, right? I don't know which. A fa or whatever we are using, and then that it will have a high values in the factor of dispersion. Next to it, I should have exactly the same note. That will be fa, but with the negative values in the dispersion, so you can really hear that this one is silent.
Right.
And then the ideal situation would be that all the other ones are neutral, so they are not too high or too low, which is really difficult. It was extremely difficult to take out the correct samples because I could not pick them up beforehand. I could not instruct my flute players any kind of way of telling them try to play it so, because that was also not the idea of giving them instructions and to use words. I just told them try to play them with, first I just asked them with vibrato and then without vibrato, but I was not telling them the way how they should be playing it or whether they should be influenced by any kind of words or descriptions. So that was really challenging afterwards to really make those matches on that you should have the one factor silent on the negative and positive values, the other ones as much as possible neutral. So basically I ended up with 20 pairs, so it was 40 sounds from 400 that I really could use, where the differences were really salient, and I would really then, by getting my data from empirical part of my research, that I would really, let's say, could be sure that they were referring to these features and not the others. That was extremely challenging, and of course, if I would know it beforehand, I would probably ask the flutist I asked to play 5,000 of the notes each. Right. I would really try them. So in order that I could really choose and maybe ask more flute players to do samples for me. So that was a real challenge. Of course, another thing was there are studies which say where the material of which the flute is made doesn't influence the sound quality. Where I have to say, well, from my own experience, we were always taught, and I believed in all of this, that actually the material does change because we are choosing this particular instrument and not the other, because we choose gold and not silver, because we prefer the wooden flute for Baroque music and not silver, and etc. But there were lots of studies that were showing that what actually is influencing the most the flute sounds and the flute quality is more the sound production of the individual players. So let's say that I thought, okay, that might not be an issue, but still, you are a believer in the meaning of I'm playing flute since lots of years, so it was kind of difficult to get out this idea from my head. What if actually it does influence? So I made 3 of the flutists to play on the same flute, so I could also make sure that the let's say, at least to some part, I did a little bit reduce or diminish the material part out of my analysis. But it was funny. I mean, challenging.
That was actually going to be my next question. I wondered, because you had mentioned 3 flutes that were used, but I wondered if you'd had any of the flautists play on the same flute or change flutes or whatever. So you just answered that question. So I don't know. Back to you, Abigail.
So I'm wondering where you think that your research could go next, and would you want to take it further? And what do you think it would contribute to the discipline, I guess?
Well, I would definitely like to take it further, as I enjoyed it a lot, and I think to collect bigger sample, that would be a very interesting idea, but also like for now, it is were only the separate notes that they were focusing on. They were not put in any kind of melody context, or with non other instruments, of course. As we do change the way how we play, let's say we adjust to the group, of course, to the ensemble when we play. So that was also the way why I wanted to avoid it. But another possible further research could be go also into this, to look at the flute sounds and the flute sound perception in the groups or in the melody in a bigger context. What I also found might be interesting is to do a little bit other way around experiment. So now, as I have the words, so my study also helped to reduce the amount of words we use in order to describe the flute sounds. So there are words that really showed there is a correlation between the flute sound features and not, and the words that they were completely misplaced and there is no need of using them because they do not mean anything they do not add anything to sound production. So since I do already have this list of words which to bring some kind of changes, I thought of now telling flutists to play it dark or play it bright, record all the samples with the different vocabularies where they would be beforehand primed on try to play it with the predominance of low features. I'm like try to play it open, try to play it focused, try to play it centered, and to see whether then afterwards make the computational analysis and to whether I would get exactly the same grouping of the factors and acoustic features, or maybe there would come other physical features that are more important. So that I found that might be interesting to see whether does it really come from this side. Maybe it will be possible, maybe. And also, by doing already this, I thought to have a win-win situation, I would like to add to it one more study then on embodied cognition. That would be to measure the movement and the position of the head, also the degree of contraction of the muscles while they are producing the sounds, to see how they are also adjusting their bodies in order to produce these different quality sounds. And the words, and to compare them between the players, flute players, just to see whether they are producing the word, whether they are producing the sounds that was called open by the same kind of body adjustments, or whether there are always different strategies to do so, which I find interesting, might be especially for teaching, for education, because let's say if there is common way of creating focused or open sounds, then that would be a very important information that you could be referring to directly in the very practical and concrete way, without need of using metaphors, maybe. Or if it's really completely different, then it would be a good sign for teachers to know that they really have to encourage each student to look for it individually, and maybe to try to give them as many, let's say, possibilities as possible in order to hear the differences in the sound qualities, but also like to encourage them to try as many different possibilities as possible, because of course, as we know, in any kind of domain, one thing that works for me does maybe not necessarily work for you. But so that would be interesting to know, how does it work with the flute timbre and its production.
Yeah, definitely.
And the possibility of using different techniques for the same outcome could allow for more control.
Yeah, of
well,
course.
Ola just just answered my next question. Actually, my next two questions in that explanation. So back to you, Abigail.
Oh, well, that was it. My first question was just asking her to introduce her project.
Oh, nice.
It was a cop-out question.
Oh, no, that's fine. I think that this research is super cool, and I really love how, like, animated and excited you get when you talk about it, because you can clearly tell you're very passionate, and you can tell you also have like a history of both listening and playing flute. And as far as I recall, your initial trajectory was that you wanted to be a professional flute player until something happened. We don't have to go into detail. But,
yeah, indeed.
And so I think it's really cool that you've managed to, like, more on a personal level, that you've managed to stay in contact in the flute world while doing something else you love by researching computational and cognitive musicology, while still sticking very closely to the world of flute.
Yes, of course. I to be honest, of course, I wanted to be a professional flutist. Due to some injuries, I can't anymore, and for some time I was quite struggling about this, of course, because I felt excluded. Nevertheless, the studies in Amsterdam actually really opened new opportunities and possibilities for approaching the topics from completely different angles. And still at the same time, well, when I was a flute teacher, I was also busy with exactly the same questions. What is the best way to transfer the knowledge from one person to the other? Or even like, how do you perceive music? How do you perceive, let's say, flute playing, or more, let's say, more specific flute topics, but also like music in general? These are always the questions I think that you come across when you interact with music as a performer, even playing, let's say, the same piece with different instruments, or when you are doing some kind of technical stuff. So I really think that we need much more dialogue between an interaction between cognitive studies of music, but that are made for musicians as well, for them to understand better how things works. And then the cooperation of cognitive researchers with musicians to sometimes also listen to them and understand how does it look from their point of view. Because by being a bit in those two worlds, I realize sometimes that researchers put sometimes hypotheses and you wonder where are they even coming from.
That's me.
Which, that could be even me as well. And actually it's cool, to try out something and do something new. But sometimes it's also good to have a talk with people that are actually experienced in the field and to first get this data. And sometimes, this kind of dialogues I think are missing. But I guess we are getting to that. There is now lots of studies also where both groups are involved, and that's I guess where we can really get best to have some results and to get to some interesting conclusions.
Definitely.
Yeah, I do have one last question, but it's for both of you, which is it flutist or flautist?
Oh. In which language?
I always thought it was flautist.
For me,
I've been saying flautist. Have I been saying it wrong my whole life?
I don't know. I think it doesn't matter. I think either way, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So. I think that's, as long as just like in Ola's experiment on words, as long as we're getting across the right parameters, even if we're using two different words.
Yeah. Thanks God. Thanks God, my study did not involve pronunciation of words. They were written.
Even crazier.
Because that would be actually an issue, especially for me and my mispronunciation of the word.
No.
Any last?
I think I would say flutist. I would say flutist.
Okay. Ola?
Flutist.
Okay.
I
guess
flutist.
I'm wrong. That's fine. No.
No,
not wrong.
Not wrong. No, I was joking, but
I don't think it's wrong.
Any last things that you want to talk about that you did in your thesis that you didn't get a chance to mention that you think are really, really important?
Well, I hope that the general message came across. Sometimes, I speak a bit in a chaotic way, so I hope people understand what actually happens. Here now, let's say the most important messages of this, of course, that I wanted to do something that would help me to understand better how how the teaching and how the timbre works in music and in general, but I also wanted to see whether it might help other people that are also not only flutists, but in general, in some ways. I also thought an interesting outcome of the study might be to help to improve and develop softwares and interfaces which are based on relationship between semantics and the perception of musical timbre. So for all people who love to make their own music, and since maybe they are not particularly a flutist, but they are doing electronic music and they are using some special features of the flute sounds, I think the makers of this kind of softwares, by getting a better understanding of the correlations between the particular sounds and the exact acoustic and physical features of different instruments, so not only a flute, but in general, could profit from it a lot in adjusting better their interfaces. Because very often we have this kind of user-friendly programs where you can create your sounds, and then you can choose, do you want let's say flute sound, do you want it to sound mellow, do you want to sound it dark, do you want to sound it warm, and by understanding how exactly the relationship between the language and the acoustic features works, they might actually get better results. I thought so.
Yeah,
but,
I think so too. But
yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, thank you so much, I guess, unless there's anything else.
No, I'm
good.
I'm fine.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. That was brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And until
Thank
next time,
you.
I guess we'll...
Yeah, and guys, I really hope to
Yeah.
see you soon.
Stay safe
one
out there.
time. And I
was supposed to be getting on a plane
enjoyed
today.
conversation
I was supposed to be
with
getting
you.
on a plane today
Really?
to go visit Amsterdam
Oh.
for like a week. Yeah.
Oh,
It's okay. It's not happening. It's fine. It will happen sometime in the future.
No, that's for sure. That's
Yeah.
for sure. But
Well, thank you so much to Ola, and
Um,
until next time, I guess we'll catch you guys later. Stay safe out there.
Yeah. Bye.
Cool. You can hit stop on your record. 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 You can hit stop on your